Kentucky Frontier Wars, British and Native American Raids. If you love untold stories of American history, hit subscribe and join us on Native Legends and History Stories, where we uncover the forgotten heroes who shaped our nation. In the brutal summer of 1776, while the Declaration of Independence was being signed in Philadelphia, a brilliant military strategist was crafting a daring plan that would change the course of the American Revolution in the Western Territories. His name was George Rogers Clark, and his strategic genius would earn him the titles Hannibal of the West, Washington of the West, and Father of Louisville. The American Northwest Territory of 1776 was a vast, untamed wilderness, stretching across what would later become Illinois and Indiana. While most American commanders focused their attention on battles along the eastern seaboard, Clark recognized a grave threat that others had overlooked. The British had established a network of fortified outposts across this territory, strongholds like Kaskaskia and Vincennes, that served as weapons depots and staging grounds for devastating raids against American settlements. These British outposts were more than just military installations. They were the command centers of a sophisticated campaign of terror. British officers used these bases to arm and coordinate with Native American allies, supplying them with muskets, powder, and ammunition. From these fortified positions, raiding parties would strike out against settlers in Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Farms were burned, families were displaced, and entire settlements lived in constant fear of attack. The British strategy was brutally effective. By keeping the frontier in turmoil, they forced the Americans to divert precious military resources away from the main theater of war in the east. The small mobile bands of raiders were nearly impossible to track or engage in decisive battle, melting away into the wilderness after each attack only to strike again somewhere else weeks or months later. Clark, however, saw what others missed. With his keen military insight, he recognized that these raids weren't random acts of violence. They were part of a coordinated campaign orchestrated from the British outposts. In the summer of 1776, while serving in Kentucky, Clark conducted an extensive survey of the Western Territories. Unlike the rough frontiersmen around him who focused on immediate threats, Clark was mapping out a bold strategic vision. The genius of Clark's analysis lay in identifying the source of the problem. The thousands of individual raids that plagued the frontier all flowed from the same wellspring, the British outposts that supplied and coordinated the raiders. Rather than trying to chase down each raiding party, Clark proposed striking directly at the heart of British power in the Northwest. It was an audacious plan, especially given the resources at his disposal. The Revolutionary War was straining American military capacity to its limits, and the Western Territories were seen as a secondary theater at best. When Clark presented his plan to the executive of Virginia, he found a sympathetic ear but an empty treasury. The legislature, already struggling to fund the main war effort, could only provide the most minimal support: a few state troops, basic supplies, and a handful of scouts. Most commanders would have abandoned such an ambitious campaign given such limited resources. But Clark's determination matched his strategic vision. He gathered his small force and began making preparations with extraordinary attention to secrecy and speed. His movements were so swift and carefully concealed that they would have impressed even military legends like Napoleon Bonaparte. The first phase of Clark's expedition took him down the Ohio River. At the falls of the Ohio, he made a strategic decision. He established a permanent settlement with 13 pioneer families who had accompanied his force from Pittsburgh, the foundation of what would later become the city of Louisville. This settlement would serve as a crucial forward base for American operations in the region. After securing Louisville, Clark continued downstream for another 60 miles. There, he made perhaps his boldest decision yet. Instead of continuing by water, where his force might be spotted, he ordered his men to disembark. The terrain was treacherous, with no established paths to follow, but Clark's leadership kept his force moving swiftly and silently toward their objective. The culmination of this remarkable march was one of the most stunning surprise attacks in military history. Clark's force emerged from the wilderness to strike at Kaskaskia with such complete surprise that it seemed to the British garrison as if the Americans had descended from the heavens themselves. Colonel Roch Dublair and the entire British garrison at Kaskaskia surrendered without firing a single shot, unable to mount any defense against Clark's perfectly executed surprise attack. Clark immediately secured the prisoners and arranged for their transport to Virginia. The French inhabitants of Kaskaskia, who had lived under British authority, readily accepted American rule and pledged their cooperation. In the fall of 1777, Governor Hamilton, commanding the British forces in the Northwest, began marshalling his resources. His strategy centered on assembling a combined force of British regulars and Native American warriors. The plan extended beyond merely defeating Clark. Hamilton intended to launch a full-scale invasion of Kentucky and push onward to capture Fort Pitt. Winter's approach forced Hamilton to adjust his timeline. While postponing the main offensive until spring, he deployed his Native American allies to maintain pressure through continuous raids along the Pennsylvania and Virginia frontiers. These raiding parties would reassemble in early spring for the primary campaign. At Kaskaskia, Clark maintained his position with his small force while gathering intelligence through an extensive network of spies. These scouts brought critical information. Hamilton's Native American forces had scattered for their winter raiding missions, leaving Vincennes defended only by British regulars. Clark saw this moment of vulnerability and prepared his men for another strike. The march to Vincennes stretched 180 miles through uncharted wilderness. Clark led just 130 men, each carrying what limited provisions they could manage on their backs. They faced treacherous terrain, dense forests, unmapped trails, and flooded lowlands. Winter storms brought freezing rain and snow. The men waded through the flooded Illinois plains for days on end. Food supplies diminished rapidly. The guides lost their bearings in the monotonous floodplain. Physical exhaustion and harsh conditions tested even Clark's most experienced soldiers. Clark pressed forward, maintaining discipline and purpose despite these challenges. Upon reaching Vincennes, his force struck with the same precision as at Kaskaskia. Governor Hamilton and his garrison surrendered, joining their Kaskaskia counterparts as prisoners bound for Virginia. The French-Canadian residents of Vincennes aligned themselves with the American cause. Several local Native American tribes, seeing Clark's successive victories, shifted their allegiances, with some actively joining the American side. The Virginia government moved to consolidate these gains by dispatching a regiment of state troops to the captured territory. Clark constructed a fort at Louisville, establishing it as his command center. The expansion of American control continued steadily. By April 1779, Robert Patterson constructed a solitary blockhouse with defensive positions, marking the first building in what would grow into Lexington, Kentucky. In 1779, Colonel Bowman launched a military expedition against the Native American settlement of Chillicothe. His force comprised Kentucky's finest fighters, seasoned frontiersmen who had survived countless battles and raids. Colonel Benjamin Logan served as second in command, while experienced officers Harrod, Bulger, and Bettinger led individual units. The expedition represented the largest coordinated military action yet attempted by Kentucky's militia forces. Bowman divided his force into 3 assault columns. Logan's division took the left flank, while Bowman himself commanded the center. The approach march maintained perfect discipline, no fires at night, careful scouting of the trail, and absolute silence as they neared their objective. At dawn, Logan's men achieved complete surprise, infiltrating the outer edges of Chillicothe without raising any alarm. The carefully orchestrated attack began to unravel at the crucial moment. While Logan's division pressed forward according to plan, Bowman's center column remained stationary. Minutes passed with no support forthcoming. Logan's men, now deep in the settlement and engaged in close combat, found themselves isolated and increasingly vulnerable. Native American warriors, recovering from their initial surprise, began to mount an organized defense. Without support from the main force, Logan had no choice but to order a fighting retreat. His men fell back in small groups, providing covering fire for each other as they withdrew. The ordered withdrawal soon deteriorated into a scramble for safety as warriors pursued the retreating Kentuckians. The entire operation collapsed into chaos. Several junior officers salvaged what they could from the disaster. Mounting their horses, they charged directly at the pursuing warriors, buying precious time for the foot soldiers to reach safety. These desperate counterattacks prevented a complete massacre, but couldn't change the operation's outcome. Bowman's expedition limped back to Kentucky having failed to achieve any of its objectives. That same year brought profound changes to Kentucky through Virginia's new land law. The legislation aimed to establish order in the distribution of Western lands, but its implementation created decades of confusion and conflict. Virginia's legislature, despite good intentions in recognizing settler claims, made a crucial oversight. They failed to fund a comprehensive survey of the territory. Instead of systematic mapping and division of land into standard sections, the law allowed warrant holders to claim and survey land wherever they chose. Each claimant bore the cost and responsibility of their own surveys. The law demanded extremely precise descriptions of property boundaries, requiring technical skills that most frontiersmen simply didn't possess. Even experienced woodsmen like Daniel Boone and Simon Kenton, who could track game through hundreds of miles of wilderness, struggled with the law's demanding technical requirements. Their land claims, though based on intimate knowledge of the territory, often failed to meet the strict legal standards for boundary descriptions. The law declared any vague or imprecise land entries invalid, negating many legitimate claims. The practical effects rippled through Kentucky society. Settlers filed overlapping claims on the same parcels. Property lines crossed and recrossed each other. Multiple patents were issued for identical pieces of land. The resulting legal tangles filled courthouse dockets and drained settlers' resources through endless litigation. Between 1779 and 1781, Kentucky transformed from a hunting ground to a land speculation frontier. Professional surveyors became as common a sight as hunters in the wilderness. Their chains and compasses replaced animal tracks as the focus of frontier attention. Settlers and speculators alike braved Native American attacks and harsh conditions in their rush to claim the richest lands. The law triggered a massive wave of immigration into Kentucky. Land hunters arrived by the thousands, many carrying multiple warrants to claim the most valuable properties. Each new arrival intensified competition for prime locations. River bottoms, springs, and fertile meadows became the subject of fierce legal battles. By 1780, the flood of immigrants attracted hostile attention. Native American resistance intensified proportionally to the increasing settlement. Colonel Byrd, leading a combined force of British troops and Native American warriors, mounted the first artillery-supported assault on Kentucky's stockade forts. The wooden walls that had repelled previous raids now faced the destructive power of cannon fire. Colonel Byrd's artillery bombardment reduced Ruddle's and Martin's stations to rubble. The British forces captured both garrisons intact, marking the first successful use of cannon against Kentucky's frontier defenses. The Native American warriors in Byrd's force, eager to press their advantage and attack other settlements, grew restive at the methodical pace of the British advance. Their increasing impatience forced Byrd to withdraw his forces, despite the tactical advantages his artillery provided. Colonel Clark mounted a decisive counterstrike in the fall of 1780. Gathering his state troops from Louisville and every available fighter from Kentucky's settlements, he led an expedition into Ohio's Native American territories. In open battle, Clark's forces defeated the assembled warriors, then destroyed their villages and food supplies. The expedition burned cornfields, demolished food storage, and laid waste to tribal settlements in direct retaliation for Byrd's spring campaign. November 1780 brought administrative changes as Kentucky's growing population required new governance structures. Virginia divided the territory into 3 counties: Fayette, Lincoln, and Jefferson. Each county established its own monthly court sessions and quarterly courts for common law and chancery cases. A network of magistrates and constables enforced local ordinances. However, serious criminal cases still required travel to Richmond for trial, as no court in Kentucky held jurisdiction over capital offenses. The flood of immigrants continued through 1781, driving land prices higher and intensifying speculation. Native American raiders adapted their tactics, striking in small bands rather than large war parties. These raids kept settlements in constant tension. No area was truly secure. Warriors would emerge without warning from the forest, attack isolated homesteads or travelers, then vanish before defenders could respond. Despite losing settlers to these attacks, the tide of occupation pushed steadily forward. The promise of Kentucky's rich land drew pioneers faster than raids could drive them away. May 1782 brought one of the war's most tactically sophisticated engagements. A band of 25 Wyandot warriors raided settlements around Estill Station, prompting Captain Estill to gather an equal number of defenders for pursuit. The forces met at Hinkston's Fork of the Licking River near present-day Mount Sterling. The battlefield terrain shaped the ensuing fight. A creek separated the opposing forces, making direct assault highly dangerous. Both sides took cover behind trees and fallen logs, establishing firing positions within 150 yards of each other. For hours they exchanged accurate rifle fire in a deadly contest of marksmanship. The casualties mounted steadily. By midday, each side had lost 8 men to the precise shooting. Captain Estill, seeking to break the stalemate, dispatched Lieutenant Miller with 6 men to cross the creek downstream and attack the Wyandot position from behind. As Miller's detachment moved right to begin their flanking maneuver, the Wyandot leader recognized the reduction in Estill's main force. Seizing this moment of vulnerability, he ordered his remaining warriors to cross the creek in force. The Wyandot charge caught Estill's weakened line off balance. With Miller's flanking force out of position and unable to return quickly enough to help, Estill's remaining men faced the full fury of the Wyandot attack. The close-quarter fighting became desperate. Estill and several of his best men fell in the savage melee. The surviving Kentucky fighters were forced to abandon their positions, leaving their dead and wounded on the field as they retreated. The Battle of Estill's defeat, as it came to be known, demonstrated the tactical sophistication of frontier warfare. Both commanders had maneuvered their forces skillfully, but the Wyandot leader's decisive counter to the flanking attempt proved the decisive moment. The engagement showed that Native American leaders could outmaneuver experienced frontier captains in open battle. The casualties at Estill's defeat were severe. Captain Estill and most of his officers lay dead on the battlefield, with similar losses inflicted on the Wyandot warriors. The battle's impact rippled through Kentucky's settlements, followed by a series of escalating confrontations. Near the Upper Blue Licks, Captain Holder led 17 Kentuckians in an encounter with 20 Wyandot warriors. The skirmish ended in defeat for Holder's men, adding to the mounting losses among Kentucky's defenders. August 1782 brought the largest Native American force yet seen in Kentucky. 500 warriors, drawn from tribes across the Northwest Territory, moved south through Kentucky with remarkable stealth. They converged on Bryan Station without detection, surrounding the fort before anyone inside realized the danger. The garrison's response demonstrated both discipline and ingenuity. Their most pressing need was water. The fort's spring lay outside the walls. The women of Bryan Station undertook this dangerous task. Walking calmly to the spring despite the hidden threat, they carried water back to the fort while maintaining an appearance of normal routine. 2 riders broke through the siege lines at full gallop, racing to alert nearby settlements. The garrison executed a clever defensive strategy. They concentrated their fire on the fort's weaker side, leading the attackers to believe this was where the defenders expected the main assault. This deception succeeded in drawing Native American warriors into exposed positions. A group of 16 mounted reinforcements charged through the siege lines at full gallop, reaching the fort without casualties. A larger group of foot soldiers attempted the same feat. Over 32 men tried to break through, but the attempt failed with significant losses. The garrison maintained disciplined fire from protected positions, targeting any warrior who presented an opportunity. After 2 nights of failed attacks, the Native American force withdrew along the Buffalo Trace toward lower Blue Licks, concerned that prolonged siege would bring Kentucky's full military strength against them. The response from Kentucky's settlements was swift. By the following noon, 160 militiamen had gathered at Bryan Station. Among the assembled officers were the most experienced frontier commanders in Kentucky. Colonel Todd, Colonel Trigg, and Daniel Boone provided senior leadership, supported by Majors Harlan McBride and Levi Todd. Captains Bulger and Gordon joined the council, along with 45 additional commissioned officers and the controversial Major McGarry. The command council faced a crucial decision. Colonel Logan was gathering a substantial force at Lincoln, just 24 hours away. Major McGarry, despite his reputation for aggression, argued for waiting for Logan's reinforcements. His caution went unheeded as the other officers, eager to engage the withdrawing warriors, voted for immediate pursuit. On August 18th, the force departed Bryan Station, pushing hard on the warriors' trail. By noon on August 19th, they reached the southern bank of the Licking River, where they caught their first glimpse of the warriors they had pursued with such determination. On the northern ridge, several Native American warriors stood in plain view. They observed the large Kentucky force with deliberate casualness, studying them for several minutes before withdrawing unhurriedly beyond the ridgeline. Even the most inexperienced scouts among the Kentuckians recognized this behavior as a calculated display. The 160 Kentucky fighters faced an immediate tactical decision. The enemy clearly held the ground ahead in strength, leaving them two options: engage in battle against superior numbers or retreat to safer ground. A group of 12 senior officers rode forward to assess the situation. Daniel Boone, intimately familiar with the terrain, provided a detailed assessment. He identified a likely ambush position approximately 1 mile past the river, where the watercourse curved in an irregular elliptical shape. This formation created ideal firing positions for warriors concealed along the Buffalo Trace, the main trail the Kentuckians would likely follow. Boone presented two tactical options: fall back to await Logan's reinforcements, or split their force to attempt simultaneous flanking attacks on the Native American position. Before the officers could fully debate these options, Major McGarry took decisive action. He spurred his horse into the river, raised his hat above his head, and called out a challenge: "Let all who are not cowards follow me." The taunt struck at the core of frontier pride. Among the 160 Kentucky fighters, not one man held back. The ordered ranks dissolved as mounted men plunged into the ford, each pressing to reach the far bank first. Foot soldiers mixed among the horsemen, creating a chaotic mass of men and animals struggling through the deep water. Upon reaching the northern bank, they maintained this disordered advance, driven by a collective determination to prove their courage. McGarry continued to lead the charge, with Boone, Harlan, and McBride close behind. The Native American response was devastating. Concentrated rifle fire erupted from concealed positions ahead of the advancing force. The lead elements halted, seeking what little cover they could find while attempting to return fire. As the center and rear elements pushed forward to support the van, they crowded onto exposed ground along the rocky ridge. Native American warriors, positioned in ravines on both flanks, caught the Kentucky force in a deadly crossfire. The Kentuckians found themselves in an untenable position. Nearly 80 men were mounted, presenting easy targets, and the bare ridge offered no protection from the withering fire. The Native American forces then executed a double flanking maneuver, threatening to cut off any retreat. The rear elements of the Kentucky force fell back to maintain an escape route. This withdrawal triggered a cascade effect. As the rear withdrew, the center and van were forced to follow, and the entire formation collapsed into a chaotic retreat. The pursuit proved as deadly as the initial ambush. Native American warriors pressed their advantage relentlessly, inflicting heavy casualties on the fleeing Kentuckians. The toll among the officers was particularly severe. Colonels Todd and Trigg, Majors Harlan and McBride, and Captains Bulger and Gordon all fell during the battle. In an ironic twist, Major McGarry, who had precipitated the disaster and fought in the thickest part of the engagement, emerged without a scratch. The final casualty count reached 60 dead among the officers and men, with 7 captured by the Native American forces. The number of wounded remained uncertain, as many men scattered during the retreat. The first survivors reached Bryan Station that night, where they encountered Colonel Logan arriving with 450 reinforcements. Logan held his position at Bryan Station, gathering survivors as they straggled in, before advancing to the battlefield to recover the dead. Colonel Logan's force gathered and buried their dead at Blue Licks. After confirming that the Native American warriors had withdrawn across the Ohio River, placing them beyond effective pursuit range, Logan led his troops back to Bryan Station and released them from service. Kentucky's response to the Blue Licks defeat followed established frontier military doctrine. Every major raid demanded retaliation. Colonel George Rogers Clark, commanding the permanent garrison at Louisville, organized a punitive expedition. He called for Kentucky militia to join his state troops in a campaign against Native American settlements in Ohio. The response demonstrated Kentucky's military recovery from Blue Licks. 1,000 riflemen assembled at the mouth of the Licking River. Under Clark's command, this force penetrated deep into Native American territory. Finding the villages abandoned, they implemented a scorched earth strategy. The expedition destroyed tribal settlements, burned food stores, and destroyed crops in the field. After completing their destruction of Native American resources, they returned to Kentucky. The Battle of Blue Licks marked the final major engagement of the American Revolution in the Western Theater. The casualties were severe, approximately 70 Kentucky fighters killed in the battle and pursuit. This defeat stood in stark contrast to earlier American successes in the Northwest Territory. The battle at Bryan Station, which preceded Blue Licks, demonstrated both the vulnerabilities and strengths of Kentucky's frontier defenses. The fort's garrison numbered only 44 armed men against a combined force of Native Americans and British Loyalists under Captain William Caldwell. Despite being significantly outnumbered, the defenders employed clever tactical deception. The women of Bryan Station played a crucial role in the fort's defense. When the garrison discovered they were surrounded, they developed a bold strategy. The fort needed water from an exposed spring. Rather than reveal their awareness of the siege, the women continued their normal water-gathering routine. Though terrified, they maintained calm appearances while collecting water under the watchful eyes of hidden warriors. This deception proved tactically vital. By appearing unaware of the threat, the women preserved the garrison's tactical position. Had they shown fear or altered their routine, the attacking force might have launched an immediate assault. Instead, the siege continued for 2 days before Caldwell's force withdrew at the approach of reinforcements. The contrasting outcomes of Bryan Station and Blue Licks highlighted the importance of tactical discipline. At Bryan Station, careful planning and controlled responses resulted in a successful defense. At Blue Licks, McGarry's impetuous challenge led the Kentucky force into a carefully prepared ambush, resulting in one of the frontier's costliest defeats. Hugh McGarry's life embodied the raw violence and personal tragedy that characterized America's frontier expansion. Born in 1744 to Irish indentured servants, McGarry grew up learning to survive through force of will and quick temper. His early life was marked by constant struggle, which forged his confrontational personality and deep-seated resentments. By 1768, McGarry had established himself in western North Carolina's Yadkin Valley, where he became neighbors with the already famous frontiersman Daniel Boone. This connection would shape McGarry's future trajectory. In 1772, he joined Boone on an exploratory expedition into Kentucky territory, witnessing firsthand the rich potential and deadly dangers of the western frontier. The following year, 1773, McGarry participated in an unsuccessful attempt to establish a permanent settlement in the region. McGarry's determination to claim a piece of Kentucky's promised land never wavered. In 1775, he joined the vanguard of permanent settlers, bringing with him his new wife, Mary Bunton Ray, a widow with 2 teenage sons, James and William. The family's decision to settle at Fort Harrod, later Harrodsburg, placed them at the epicenter of escalating tensions between settlers and Native American tribes. March 1777 brought the tragic turning point in McGarry's life. As Shawnee raids intensified across Kentucky, his stepsons James and William joined a sugaring crew working in the woods near Fort Harrod. The seemingly routine task of collecting maple sap turned deadly when Shawnee warriors ambushed the work party. William Ray fell in the initial attack. His brother James, renowned for his speed of foot, managed to kill his brother's slayer before escaping to safety. McGarry led the search party that discovered William's mutilated body. The sight of his stepson's remains proved overwhelming. The hardened frontiersman swayed in his saddle, nearly losing consciousness. The traumatic discovery marked the beginning of McGarry's descent into increasingly violent behavior. The impact on his wife Mary was equally devastating. She retreated into a deep depression from which she would never emerge, dying 3 years later in 1780. The tragedy transformed McGarry's simmering hostility toward Native Americans into consuming hatred. When raiders struck Fort Harrod's outlying cabins, McGarry led a counterattack with savage intensity. Among the dead raiders, they found one wearing William Ray's distinctive hunting shirt. McGarry's response shocked even his fellow frontiersmen. He methodically dismembered the warrior's corpse and fed the pieces to his dogs, an act of desecration extreme even by the brutal standards of frontier warfare. The psychological toll of William's death manifested in increasingly erratic behavior. During Mary's prolonged decline, stories circulated through Fort Harrod of McGarry's infidelity. These accounts included bizarre claims that William's ghost appeared to McGarry, wrapped in burial sheets, warning him against pursuing other women. Whether these supernatural visitations stemmed from guilt, grief, or the effects of frontier whiskey remains unclear. Following Mary's death, McGarry married Katie Yoakum, but this union brought no peace to his troubled life. The couple's relationship devolved into frequent public quarrels, with McGarry's violent temper on full display. His confrontations extended to Katie's family. In one notable incident, he threatened to shoot her brother's damn gourd, frontier parlance for threatening to kill. The constant presence of alcohol, a standard feature of frontier life, likely exacerbated McGarry's volatile personality. McGarry's reputation in the community continued to deteriorate. Beyond his personal conflicts, he developed a reputation for reckless gambling. In 1781, authorities charged him with organizing and betting on Sunday horse races, activities that violated both religious sensibilities and civil order. The Virginia court's verdict was damning. They branded him an infamous gambler and barred him from holding any position of public trust or honor in the state. Despite his personal failings, McGarry maintained his position among Kentucky's frontier fighters. His experiences, the loss of William, the decline and death of Mary, his remarriage to Katie, and his increasingly self-destructive behavior reflected the brutal realities of frontier life. The transformation of a man who had started life as the son of indentured servants, risen to become a respected settler, only to descend into notorious violence, illustrated the psychological toll of America's westward expansion. McGarry's struggles with alcohol intensified over time, fueling both his violent outbursts and periods of dark depression. His drinking companions reported episodes where he would alternate between boasting of his frontier exploits and falling into morose reflection about William's death. The combination of personal tragedy, alcohol, and the constant stress of frontier warfare created a volatile mixture that repeatedly erupted in violence. The community's attitude toward McGarry became increasingly ambivalent. While his fighting skills remained valuable for frontier defense, his unpredictable behavior and hair-trigger temper made him a liability in civilian life. His fellow settlers maintained a wary distance, never knowing whether they would encounter the skilled frontiersman or the vengeful, drunken antagonist. This social isolation likely contributed to his continued spiral into excessive drinking and violent confrontations. The autumn of 1781 marked a decisive shift in the American Revolution. While Lord Cornwallis's surrender at Yorktown effectively ended British operations in the east, fighting continued unabated on the western frontier. Major Hugh McGarry found himself at the center of one of the war's final and bloodiest engagements. In August 1782, A combined force of 50 British Loyalist Rangers and 300 Native American warriors from the Great Lakes region mounted an attack on Bryan Station, near present-day Lexington. The attackers lost their initial advantage of surprise and lacked artillery to breach the fort's wooden walls. After several days of burning outlying buildings and killing livestock, they began a withdrawal toward the Ohio River. A relief force of 180 Kentucky militiamen assembled to pursue the retreating raiders. This pursuit force included some of Kentucky's most experienced frontier fighters, including the legendary Daniel Boone and Major Hugh McGarry. Colonel Benjamin Logan was gathering additional reinforcements, with the renowned scout Simon Kenton serving as his guide. During the Council of War at Bryan Station, McGarry, despite his reputation for aggression, advocated waiting for Logan's reinforcements before pursuing the raiders. This uncharacteristic caution earned him a sharp rebuke from Colonel John Todd, who questioned his courage and ordered an immediate pursuit. McGarry rode out with the force, his commander's words clearly rankling. The pursuit force encountered troubling signs. Daniel Boone and other experienced scouts noted that the raiders' trail was suspiciously obvious. The withdrawing force made no attempt to conceal their route or split into smaller groups, tactics that experienced warriors typically employed. The clear trail seemed deliberately laid, as if inviting pursuit. On August 19, 1782, the Kentuckians reached the southern bank of the Licking River. Boone, drawing on decades of frontier experience, warned that the terrain ahead was perfect for an ambush. The river's course created a natural trap, with high ground providing excellent firing positions for concealed warriors. McGarry, still smarting from Todd's earlier insult, seized this moment to reassert his reputation for boldness. He proclaimed loudly, "We have force enough to whip all the Indians we find. By Godly, what did we come here for?" Then turning to Boone, he delivered a personal challenge. "I never saw any signs of cowardice about you before." The insult struck deep. Boone, known throughout the frontier for his steady temperament, responded with uncharacteristic emotion. Tears of rage in his eyes, he declared, "No man before has ever dared to call me a coward. I can go as far in an Indian fight as any other man." McGarry raised the stakes further, shouting for all to hear, "Them that ain't cowards follow me, and I'll show where the yellow dogs are." Without waiting for orders, he spurred his horse into the river. The entire Kentucky force, caught up in the moment and unwilling to appear cowardly, followed him across. Boone, even as he joined the charge, called out a grim prophecy. "Come on, we are all slaughtered men." His words proved prophetic. As the Kentuckians reached the far bank, devastating rifle fire erupted from concealed positions. The ambush was perfectly executed, catching the mounted men in exposed positions with no cover. Battle quickly became a slaughter. 70 Kentuckians fell in the initial volley and subsequent pursuit. Colonel Todd, who had questioned McGarry's courage at Bryan Station, died in the engagement. Among the dead was Israel Boone, Daniel's son, killed by a musket ball to the neck, the second of Boone's sons lost to frontier warfare. McGarry survived the battle unscathed, though he found himself at the center of bitter recriminations afterward. When blamed for precipitating the disaster with his impetuous charge, he deflected responsibility. He claimed that other militia commanders had pushed for immediate pursuit, hoping to engage and defeat the raiders before Logan's reinforcements could arrive and share in the glory. The aftermath of Blue Licks left deep scars in the Kentucky settlements. The loss of 70 experienced fighters represented a significant portion of the frontier's defensive strength. For the survivors, the battle highlighted the deadly cost of allowing personal pride to override tactical judgment. McGarry's role in the disaster added another dark chapter to his already controversial reputation in frontier society. The battles of Kentucky's frontier shaped American expansion westward through individual choices and their consequences. While George Rogers Clark's bold strategies secured the Northwest Territory, Hugh McGarry's rash decisions at Blue Licks demonstrated how personal pride could lead to tragedy. Between these extremes stood the quiet courage of Bryan Station's women, whose simple act of drawing water helped save their community. Thanks for watching. If you want to discover more untold stories of America's frontier, Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories. Every story matters. Every detail counts.